So yeah, I'm at the bottom of my garden, away from the house, in the dark and cold. Oh my gosh, the weather at the moment. So yeah, and I'm really, really excited to be doing this. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to hang out with you and have this conversation.
Oh, thank you. And you must be so, now the book's out. It's been out in the States, I think, for a bit, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah,
And
a
it's
couple of
out in
weeks.
the UK now.
Yeah, so yeah, it came out on the 10th, on what I've taken to call him Prince Harry Day, on January 10th. And then actually it came out in New Zealand and Australia on the 4th. And then it came out in the UK on Thursday, on the 19th. So it's
And
gradually making its way out into the world.
it is, yeah, it must feel good because it's probably been a few years. I think it's been at least a 2-year process, hasn't it? But it's probably been an 18-year process, really.
Yeah, I mean, I've been blogging for just under 19 years. I've been running Baggage Reclaim for 17 and a half, approaching 18 years. And it were about 22 months since I did the book deal, and it's about 2.5 years since I started writing the book proposal. So it's a long old journey.
Yeah, yeah. So it must feel good to be out there. As I mentioned from listening to the Friday podcast, somebody's actually, Cheryl's just said, thank you for the podcast. She's a listener. I wonder if you listened to the Friday episode, because you mentioned there that you're actually going to be stopping the podcast and the blog.
Yeah.
So this is really you kind of walking the walk and deciding to say no to something pretty major.
Yeah, I think, you know, I started blogging when I was 27. I started Baggage Reclaim when I was 28. And I'm now 45, and actually will be 46 in the summer. So a lot has changed in that time. And it has been an amazing journey. But funny enough, writing my book, The Joy of Saying No, started to open up this idea that it was also time to make a shift. That, you know, in 2017, when I turned 40 and my father died, I felt very lost and confused and was like, what's going on with my life? What am I doing? And I actually went through a phase then when I thought that I was ready to stop with Baggage Reclaim. And I paused the podcast for the best part of a year, because I didn't, after taking time out after he died, I didn't fit back into my life. And I realized in that time that it was unrealistic of me to expect that I would just want to always do the same thing forever and ever more. Just like the way we think, oh, you know, back in the day, it's like, oh, you just work and you work, and then you collect your gold watch and your VCR at 65 and you're on your way. And I had got into a bit of a job mentality with myself. But taking that time out where I didn't do the podcast, I was working quietly behind the scenes, but I was free of a schedule. I discovered so much joy, and I was slowed down, and I was actually at my happiest with work, being out of this content producing schedule. And then I felt I really missed the podcast. So I thought, oh, you know, I want to go back. And you know what? I have no regrets. I have had so much fun. And I did go back, you know, in a different way to how I had been before. But it is almost 18 years of me doing Baggage Reclaim, and I would like to show up in a different way. I am a recovering people pleaser, and people pleasing has been quite intertwined with work. I think a lot of people will find that in their relationship with work, and so much giving in the producing of stuff, and they can slip into overgiving. And I want to have a more intentional relationship with my work. And so it is time for a change. And I felt that the way to do that is a hard reset and letting go. Stop trying to fix and tweak and goodness knows what else. Just let it be and appreciate the work that I've already created.
Yeah, and that's out there for people to access and use and learn from and enjoy. And you mentioned just before we started, we came on live, that you, after you recorded the episode where you kind of announced that to the fans and to people who watch you did feel emotional, but you also felt it's the right thing. You absolutely know it's the right thing.
Oh yeah, you know, it's funny. I think this decision has been brewing for a really long time, but in very subtle ways. And I've made the decision at exactly the right time for me. something I've been talking about actually over these last few days as the decision has come out is I don't think people realize just how much goes into being a creative and being a creator, and that I want to invest in this baby I have just birthed, the joy of saying no.
Yeah.
It is not possible for me to do all the things. And my husband said to me in December, he says, if you cleared, your schedule and your projects, with this book coming out, because how are you going to do all of that, plus all of the commitments that you currently have for the book and that will no doubt come along? The book will make its way, more and more things will happen. And I was like, that's an interesting thing that he's just said. And I did. I found myself, like, I started to cry towards the end of the episode. I suddenly felt overwhelmed of what I was saying, but it was also liberating. And I've been surrounded by an amazing community, for this. Like, I self-published my first 4 books. It is my community that has supported, that has given me a career. I didn't have to wait for somebody to pick me. But I also have to prioritize my needs, because I've spent 18 years taking care of the needs of people through Baggage Reclaim. And I need to change my relationship with work in a deeper way. And bearing in mind, I have been shifting and changing it, but it's time for me to go deep and big. But also, I cannot do all the things. And I want to enjoy having my book out. And I also want to chill out. As I've been saying for several months now, and it's become a bit of a mantra, I just don't want to hoe myself out. It's just not my thing. No disrespect to anybody else who wants to go and do that. I like being in my bed early. I like having quite a chilled life. I hate having an overstuffed schedule. And I like enjoying my creativity. And that's what I need to prioritize.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. It's so amazing to hear you say this. I think it will be this will be so useful and valuable to people as well, to listen to someone who, like you say, it might seem like a strange thing to do at the height of the book's out, and here we are talking about everything and the community and all that kind of stuff. But it's really, really valuable to share when you're going through things like this, and the process of kind of deciding to say no to yourself, right, as well as no to other people.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about being a recovering people pleaser, and in amongst that, I'm also a recovering perfectionist. And, I'm the worst boss I ever had. I have demanded far more of myself than any boss ever demanded of me. And I never run out of ideas. So I can always come up with, I have so much stuff, out there, but also behind the scenes, that if they did a digital version of Hoarders, I would have the equivalent of like 2-3 houses full of stuff. And I know that sometimes we feel funny about saying no to ourselves, but the fact of the matter is I can't be and do everything. And just as I say in the book, that getting clear on what we need to say no to allows us to say yes to other things. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen instantly, because I think sometimes we feel like, oh, well, if I say no to that, I must see an instant result. But I think back to the start of my journey, with this work, where I said no to being in crappy relationships with emotionally unavailable and shady men. And I said no to not having boundaries with my family. I didn't know that I was going to meet my now husband like 8 months later when I was making those decisions. I didn't know that actually, even when I was making that decision, I was a month out from starting Baggage Reclaim. So I didn't even know that I was going to do that. I didn't know I'd go on to have kids, I go on to work for myself, but I had to put my stake in the sand and say, this is who I am and this is what I stand for, instead of kind of bending to whichever guy came into my life or whatever need somebody else presented to me.
That's such a good point. You say no to something means yes to so much other stuff, and you don't need to know exactly what that'll be, but just have the faith. And if you don't have the space, it's never going to come in. So our signature question is, how would you sum up your relationship with yourself right now? I feel like this has been changing. Could be ever changing.
I was thinking about this earlier on, and I think actually that it is expansive at the moment. What I mean by that is I have been in a monogamous relationship with myself for 17 and a half years. Before I would ditch me for any guy that came along and offered me the prospect of a romantic relationship. I threw me under the bus for work, for keeping up with whatever else anybody wanted of me. But I am in a monogamous relationship with myself in the sense that I have to look out for me. Right? I'm the sort of steward of my bandwidth, the keeper of my needs, the feeler of my feelings, the thinker of my thoughts. If I'm not going to look out for me, who else is? And I'm not saying that nobody else is looking out for me, but I'm the only one who has access to that information. And I think that one of the traps that people fall into with self-help is thinking, I just do a little bit of work and then everything will just slot into place. And I only need to do that little bit of work. And then it's like, I'm set. And what I've noticed is I can remember the dramatic shifts that I made in a matter of weeks and months, 17 and a half or so years ago. Okay. And then I think about how many other things that I've been through and how many ways that I've evolved. But I'm listening to myself in a very, very deep way at the moment. And so I feel like there's this expansive relationship that I'm having with myself, that I'm going deeper.
Such a beautiful word. And that's like the good news, bad news, isn't it? The good that this work never really stops. It's kind of, once you kind of start digging in, but then it's brilliant as well, because it's like it moves you in different ways that you could never imagine.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, are looking, they see it as a happy ending. So from something I've talked about a lot actually is that some people mistakenly believed I was like this poster child of a happy ending, in the sense of this person who openly talked about traumatic events in her childhood, but used that, and actually in adulthood as well, and used that to, yes, educate others, but also to navigate her way out of that. And there she is, she meets her now husband 8 months later, she quickly goes on to have children, blah, 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 blah. And I say, listen, okay, yeah, that happened. It's not an ending. That was just the beginning. And actually, it would have been easy. And I think I did for a while believe that, oh, wow, like all this amazing stuff has happened in such a relatively short period of time. Well, the past 10 years in particular, I have been on a roller coaster. And I think your relationship evolves. And the things that you think you've learned, the universe goes, you think you know all of that, do you? Let me throw you this thing. So yeah, you get along with that. And also because you grieve something and you feel like you've learned that thing and you've dealt with it. And then something else comes along and you get to deal with that from a different angle. And I'm not saying that you're always learning in this very intense way. Actually, what you're doing is living. And but what it is I think it feels quite intense at the beginning when you really are making shifts out of these old patterns that you have sustained you for a long time. And then as it becomes the new normal, yeah, you're going to have times where, I mean, honestly, sometimes over the last several years, I'm like, what is going on? Like, what does life want with me now? Why are you messing with me? Have I not learned enough already? What do you want from me now? And then you go, okay, fine. This is always showing me what boundaries I need to create, how I need to get into a deeper relationship with myself in some way.
Yeah. And so can we talk a little bit about when you first started setting boundaries in your life, or when you realized that you needed to? I mean, in the book you talk about particularly about a medical situation. Is that the time when you would say that you started actually just kind of like representing yourself?
Yeah, I was brought up in Dublin, in Ireland, mainly. Went Catholic school. I went to all girls Catholic convent school. Only Black person there. Only Protestant. And so even though I'm not Catholic, I actually have the Catholic guilt, to go along with that.
Like, and, thanks for that.
I spent all my childhood being a good girl. And then once I became a teenager, looking for love in the wrong places, bought with boys and then men, but also just trying to please everybody, like overperforming at work. And I was diagnosed with an immune system disease called sarcoidosis in, it was sort of end of 2003, beginning of 2004. And this was after months of traipsing in and out of GPs with, with these mystery symptoms. I was losing the sight in my left eye. And my body was riddled with lumps. There were so many different things going on. And then I went on steroids for a year because things were getting really bad. Like I was struggling to breathe, struggling to walk. Did a year of steroid treatments, which steroids come with its own set of problems, because it's the idea is to suppress your immune system, force it into submission. Came off the steroids within a month, all the symptoms came flooding back. At which point they said, yeah, you're gonna have to go on steroids for life if you want to basically avoid being dead by 40 from pulmonary heart failure type of thing. And I just sat there listening to all of this, and it was that very cliche thing where in a very compact amount of time, like sort of suddenly having this realization, like you just go along with things. It was always going out with emotionally unavailable guys. I've been involved with a co-worker who had a girlfriend, and I was so concerned with chasing after him. I didn't care about my health. And so I heard myself saying no to going on steroids for life. And I actually looked around because I was so surprised to hear it from me. And he was like, what? He's like, you don't have any choice. So I was like, I do. And I basically said, look, I'm going to go off, explore other options. If I don't get any better, I'll be back. I'm not stupid, It's not like I'm going to sit there and let myself get worse. And 9 months later, I was told that I was in remission and have remained so since then. So since April 2006, I've been in remission. But that was a major turning point for me in the sense that I realized nobody's coming to save me. Because I think there was a part of me, you kind of have that like Prince syndrome, where you're waiting for them to swoop in on its white horse and save you. It wasn't happening. And I realized I actually wanted to live and I wanted to fight for myself. And I didn't really know what that entailed. Like I left that hospital going, what the hell have you done type of thing. But it was creating boundaries. I didn't know what that meant. All I knew was I needed to say no to some stuff. I needed to make clear what was and wasn't permissible, what did and didn't work for me, because it was either that or be really sick or die. And I just wasn't doing that. And that being told that, and I went to see a kinesiologist, which is a bit like energy medicine, acupuncture without needles. And she was the one who mentioned boundaries and about trauma and all this anger and hurt that I was carrying around with me. And I took that conversation, which to be fair, I'd actually wanted to run away from. And I was like, yeah, I could do with just setting a bit of boundaries. And it was trial and error. Think of it like a crash test dummy. Because remember, this was 2005. So back then it was, if you wanted advice about relationships or about self-esteem, it was particularly for women, here's 50 ways to please your man, put on some sexy lingerie, cook him a dinner. Everything was through that sort of heteronormative lens, but it was all about fix it with, sex, looking good, being all cute and good. And so I was feeling it out, just trying it out and seeing how I went. And certainly in that respect, it was, don't get me wrong, it wasn't easy. But from the moment that I started doing this, I started immediately seeing shifts in my life. And there've been some very tough conversations, some very tough situations along the way. And even though at the time I would feel deeply wounded, sometimes I don't regret any of them. Because I'm alive, I'm happier, healthier as a result. I've had so many of the things that I've needed and wanted out of life as a result.
Yeah. So it seems like as soon as you started understanding that you had that agency and kind of taking responsibility for yourself, so your health changed, everything in your life changed.
Yeah, it was things like I'd hid my illness at work because I wanted to look like a good employee. So I hid it, and what I couldn't hide, I overcompensated for by overperforming.
It's so stressful. That must be so stressful.
I was putting steroids in my eye like every hour at one point, but I was still juggling calls, going to see clients. I would go for hospital appointments. I was going to hospital practically every week at one point, sometimes a few times a week. And then after this turning point, I went and I sat down with HR and I told them what was going on. And they were like, what? And they said, right, you can come in later and you can now leave earlier, and you can do that for as long as you need to. You don't need to explain or justify to anybody why you have an appointment. We will come and do an assessment. They do all that sort of facilities assessment. I was like, probably could have done this.
Yeah, because people aren't mind readers, right? Whether it's your job or your partner or friends or whatever, sometimes they don't know necessarily what's needed until you can tell them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it was stuff like, I remember my mom being around and she was going on and on about something. Bless her. She didn't realize, let's say, the impact that she was having. But my stomach had gone into, I noticed that I felt physically ill.
Wow.
I said, how have I not noticed this before? And I was like, I need you to stop. I said, I need to get a cup of tea. I just need a, and these are, because I think a lot of the time people see boundaries as, you are wrong and I need to tell you what to do. And my boundaries are this. Actually, your boundaries are about clearly communicating who you are.
Yeah.
And people know where they are with you and where they stand and what the boundaries are when you communicate who you are. If you're always hiding your needs, your wants, your feelings, your thoughts, your expectations, how the hell is anybody going to know where they are with you? And I used to just sit there and grimace as people were dumping their stuff on me. And I was, yeah, privately, screwing with them or screwing with myself. One day I noticed that I'd been ragging on myself for a whole 12 hours or something. I can't even remember what the hell had happened, but it had happened first thing in the morning. At about 9-10 o'clock at night, I realized that I had been raging at myself all day. That was another big turning point where I was like, Jesus, is this what it's like inside your head all day long? So I became really conscious of where I had these raging thoughts at myself, where there was this simmering anger and hurt. And honestly, I remember being out with a client, we were in lunch in Soho somewhere, and the food, I noticed I was itching. And I was like, I wonder if I'm a bit allergic to what's on this plate. In the past, I would have been like, oh God, I don't want to look like I'm being, I was like, I'm not eating that. Just simple things like that. But it's like your body, your life goes, oh, okay, we're working together now.
Yeah. And I think there'll be so many people on this call that can relate to this, because some people, it's like you say, it's so simple, but lots of us, for some reason, are not very good at doing it or aren't able to do it. So it's brilliant to hear you be so honest like that. Shall we, what I wanted to do is share some of on your website, you talk about, you do are you a people pleaser quiz, which I think most of us are to some extent. But what I thought we could do is kind of share some of the questions and ask people if they can relate in the chat box. And then we'll kind of talk through, maybe then you could introduce us to the different types of people pleasers. I think you say that you're an efforting. Is that right?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm an efforter. Like my people pleasing style is efforting. So, I'm all about effort, being the best, doing the best, putting in the most amount of effort, working hard, being seen to be exhausting.
Exhausting. Well, I'm so glad you're out the other side anyway. I'm very glad. So guys, let's go through some of these. I'm just going to read out, I think there's about 7 or 8 that I'm going to read out here, but if you relate to any of these, then let us know. And remember, this is a judgment-free zone, and there's no right or wrong answer here, but I just think some people will really relate to these and also appreciate when people share. So if you relate to any of these statements, let us know. 1, I put other people's needs and wants ahead of my own and feel as if I come last. 2, 2, I worry about not being liked, getting into trouble, hurting feelings, or looking like a bad or selfish person. If I say no, express needs, have limits, or am honest. Number 3, I say yes without considering the meaning and consequences and then feel trapped, overwhelmed, anxious, or resentful, or piss people off due to backing out or not having the bandwidth or skill set. Yep. That's so true, because I think you do say that about if you don't say no, if you don't say like from an authentic place, yes or no, if you just say yes and you don't want to do it, then you'll just end up resenting the situation or that person. Yeah, that's so important.
Absolutely.
This is one that I'm sure people in the group will relate to. I struggle to ask for help and fear being a burden and inconveniencing or discomforting others, resulting in dismissing my own needs. and opinions as my being oversensitive, needy, difficult, selfish, or demanding. Yeah. Number 5, I say yes based on feeling guilty, afraid, obliged, or anxious. And then 6, I've had stress-related illness or burnout, or felt tipped over the edge into a temper that left me feeling ashamed. So many different. I mean, there's I think there's about 20 different questions, isn't there, on the quiz, and they're all like looking at different ways of how we relate to everything, right? How we relate to other people, ourselves, our jobs, our everything. So yeah, there's lots of yeses in the group. David shared the quiz, so that's brilliant. So do you want to introduce us then to the 5 people pleaser types, and then give us a bit of advice for each one, maybe?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people assume that people pleasing is about being a doormat, or that it's like a badge of honor, like, oh my gosh, I'm a people pleaser. I'm just a people pleaser, like seeing it as almost like a virtuous quality. And so this causes a great deal of misunderstanding, because you're either going to feel ashamed, like, oh my God, like I'm just like a doormat, or you're going to feel almost unable to step away from people pleasing because you see it as such a sign of a good quality, as a good person. And so I talk about the 5 styles of people pleasing, which are gooding, efforting, avoiding, saving, and suffering. And the names imply what you're concerned with, like what your key driver is and how you go about pleasing. So if you are a gooder, so you have the people pleasing style of gooding, you are very concerned about being good, looking good, giving that appearance of being a good person, a good guy, a good girl, a good Christian, a good something. And as a result, you can get very caught up in your intentions. So it's like, I just need to have the intention of being a good person. And it doesn't really matter about necessarily the impact of certain things that I do. So this can get you into a lot of trouble, because sometimes as well, it might mean that in your people pleasing, you can be quite moralistic, where if somebody tries to call you out about something, and rightfully so, you might be like, how could you? Do you not realize what a good person I am, and
I'm a good
all
person.
these amazing good things I'm doing for you?
Yeah.
If you are an efforter and you have the efforting style of people pleasing, which is my one, that is about effort. Your way, it's not enough for you to give the appearance of being good or looking good. You are gonna try to prove it with effort. So you will concern yourself with giving 100%, being the best, perfectionism. And you're either trying to prove something because you don't feel as if you've had that recognition already, or you're so used to being known and pleasing for your achievements and accomplishments that this you sort of over-identify with it. Just like somebody who has that gooding style has so often been praised for being good. Oh, you're so good, you're so quiet, you're so blah, blah, blah. If you have the avoiding style of people pleasing, you're somebody who pleases people by avoiding anything you think will cause the remotest bit of discomfort to somebody. So a classic example of this is you may have grown up in an environment where nobody talks about a big elephant in the room. And your way of being pleasing, even if that big elephant in the room has something to do with you and is actually causing you a great deal of unhappiness, your way of trying to be pleasing is you're not going to talk, you're never going to voice any uncomfortable feelings, any concerns. You might, when you're in a romantic relationship, what do you want to do? I want to do what you want to do. I like what you like. So that's your way of being pleasing, which can be very frustrating for people on the other side of that, because it can seem like you're sitting on the fence. And then, of course, when things don't go your way, it can be a bit like, well, hold on a second, I've avoided all of these things for you.
Yeah.
And people are like, what are you talking? What are you talking about? People who have the saving style, these are the helpers, the fixers, the saviors of this world. Now, people who have the saving style may have gooding or efforting elements to it, but their way of feeling good about themselves and also pleasing others is with the helping and the fixing and the rescuing and the saving type of stuff. And in amongst that, it's because often people who have that style have been told that a good person always helps. A good person always sacrifices themselves. But it can also be that, if you grow up in an environment where there's a lot of stuff going on And so you see it as your job to kind of jump in there and maybe act like the parent or raise your, your siblings. And so this can cross over into how you show up in the world. And again, you can have very good intentions, but it means that you overstep boundaries. And with your fixing and your helping, and you can find it difficult to understand that you're doing that because it's like, well, I'm doing a good thing.
Yeah.
And then the last one, people who have the suffering style may have always had it, but sometimes they used to do the others and then they've sort of fallen on their sword. But some people see it as the more you suffer, the more it makes you a better person. It's like, I bleed for you. And so you sometimes see this, particularly in romantic relationships, I think, where it's like, but look how much I've put up with from you. I have had no boundaries. I've let you torture me. How could you not want to be with me? And but also anybody who identifies as being a scapegoat, they don't necessarily realize that actually all these jobs that we take on within our families, it's a way of trying to please somebody. So even being a scapegoat, somebody else is benefiting from that as well.
And all of these, Natalie, I would most, like when you're talking about them, it's usually not, no one's asking you often to do this, right? It's like, it's either behavior you've seen modeled or it's just what you think needs to be done too. So you talked about suffering in a romantic situation. Quite often I imagine that's people doing things without being told to or asked to. It's just that's what they feel like needs to happen to make them a good partner.
These are messages that, look, something I stress in the book. If you're not a child right now, you grew up during the age of obedience, which is where the communicating, disciplining, interacting with children centered on making them as obedient, as excessively compliant as possible. And making them very responsive to authorities. We have all grown up in environments, wherever we lived at home, the people we were around, school, church, community, what we saw on TV, media, and we have picked up direct and indirect messages about what makes a good versus a bad person. Something I've frequently mentioned recently is you only have to think about how we talk about babies. Oh, they're such a good baby. Why? Because a bad baby is one that doesn't sleep. There's a reason why that the baby, but suddenly it's, oh, they're such a good baby because they're easy. And so this whole good bad thing starts starts straight out the gate. It's a good pregnancy. It's a bad, on and on. And sometimes we are told that it is our job to do certain things. So sometimes, it'd be like, I don't know, our family doesn't do such and such a thing, or people like us don't do that. So there are sometimes very clear messages, but we assume jobs within our families. And so it can be, well, I see it as my job to be always really, really well behaved because this is what I think everybody needs from me because they've got this problem going on over there. Or we notice that we get praised a lot for, our schoolwork, for being, really well behaved. And it's like, oh, it's really important to these people to be well behaved. Or we notice that our parent is like, 1 minute they adore us, the next thing, we're the worst thing on earth and we're scapegoated. And it was like, oh, that's our job to be that. So some of this stuff we're told, but a lot of it, we as children, we put together this information and go, well, this is my job. This is how I help out. And this is how I'm good. And I'm so glad that you said this about, well, a lot of the time, people haven't necessarily said, you must do this thing. Because often in our struggle, we're saying, no, we carry on as if we're under a contractual obligation to continue with something that we never necessarily entered into a direct agreement about in the first place.
And also the other people involved, like I think you touched on this earlier, like it's frustrating. It can be frustrating for them. Or if you're not able to tell people what you want and what you need, you're not really showing the real you. Like we talk about Brené Brown quite a lot in this community and how she talks about vulnerability. And that's actually very courageous. And you need, if you want to be good friends with somebody, you want them to be able to tell you when they're not feeling great and when they need something, right? So I think understanding that is really important. Can I talk to you? Can I ask you about my mum and see what you think, what style you think she is? Because she's a lovely person, and she's a super carer, and she is definitely a super people pleaser. Lots and lots of grandchildren, lots and lots of children. And so she last week came and dog sat for me while I went on holiday. And I found out from my neighbour that my mum is allergic to my dog, but she doesn't want to tell me that because she wants to do the nice thing and help out. And And I feel like, and I haven't kind of brought it up with her yet. I did say, do you think you might be allergic to Milo? And she said, no, I love him. I'm not allergic to him. And I said, well, that wasn't the question. So I need to work out how to deal with it. But what kind of, I mean, I obviously want, her health is more important to me than her looking after my dog. So
Of course.
what kind of people pleasing do you think that is?
So it sounds to me like there's a mixture of saving and gooding going on there, in terms of, you know, there can be this very strong sense of, this is what a good mother does, this is what a good grandmother does,
yeah,
this is what a good person does. And depending on if your mom derives her sort of a sense of self, her worth from being needed, and in fact needs to feel needed in order to feel purposeful, it can feel very difficult to say no. I mean, you'd be amazed at how many stories I hear about this pet sitting and there's an allergy involved. And the thing I say to people, this is the classic example of, it doesn't make you a bad person for having an allergy, you know, to the dog. And if your mom pet sitting isn't going to endanger her health, cause more problems than it solves, then great. If you're allergic to the dog, she must be dosing herself up on
she was apparently
Puritan and all sorts of stuff in order to do it. But this sense of like, she doesn't want to let you down.
Yeah.
She sees it as, it's my job to help. It's my job to sort of step in and fix the situation. If I don't do this, who else is going to do it? Well, there'll be other people.
Yeah.
But she hasn't voiced the allergy to you, so you don't know that there's other people that you even need to consider asking. And I think it highlights what you said, like boundaries, including, and that includes saying no. Saying yes is also a form of boundaries as well. Expressing limits. These are forms of trust. So if you're not saying these authentically, it's like going, I don't trust you to handle my no. And it's not necessarily, sometimes that is exactly how we feel about somebody. Like, if I tell you no, I know exactly what you're going to turn around and do to me. But a lot of the time, we've just got so much anxiety around saying no because of being taught to be compliant and our fear of being disobedient or looking like a bad person, that we end up vilifying ourselves and feeling like we're a bad person, that we're going to hurt people and inconveniencing them. And it blows up into this big thing in our heads. And the funny thing is, you've gone to your mom and you said, well, do you think I love the dog? That's not what I asked you. That's not what I asked you.
It's not, and the fallout when you do say no to things, because I've started saying no to more stuff now, and the fallout is so much less. It's so much less than the big, like you say, the big kind of explosion in your head of how you think it's going to be and what could possibly go wrong. Sometimes people don't really accept it, but most of the time they'll get over it, right?
Yeah, I mean, something I've said is it's not worth avoiding no 100% of the time for the 5% of occasions that actually meet or exceed the picture that you've painted in your mind about that. Because most of the time, if you're very honest about how people responded when you said no, most of the time, the sky never falls down anyway, but most of the time it just was not the big drama that you had in your head. But we don't get to discover this if we don't actually have a go at saying no. And even when I have come under fire for saying no, and it has typically been mostly with family that I've had, but it's also been in other situations as well. You know, I look out my window or open my front door and the world is still turning. It's not Armageddon outside. And it can be very, one of the things I emphasize is that it can be very unsettling to say no. Why? Not because no is a bad thing, but because it's so unfamiliar to some of our bodies that of course it's going to throw out danger signals, because your body's going, what the frick is going on here? What are you doing? You're literally in unfamiliar territory. So when you express a need, when you express a want that differs from somebody else's, when you say no, or you express a limit or whatever it is, your body is like checking all the files and it's going, I don't have anything on here that says anything whatsoever. What's going on? So it goes, alert, alert, danger. It thinks you're out in the wild about to be savaged,
Yeah.
Because if all you've done is say yes, 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 regardless of what you actually intended, your body doesn't know any different. So it's not that the no is bad. And this is something that I keep stressing to people. When you have that, oh my God, I feel so guilty, I feel so terrible, it's your body going, whoa, this is new, this must be bad.
Yeah, and that's the physicality around it, isn't it? So whether that's the kind of like, oh, you just want to kind of like crawl inside, whether your throat goes dry, whether all that kind of stuff, like you say, it's the body just getting used to something, and so we just need to practice it, right?
Yeah, it is, you know, it's a muscle that you're building up. And I mean, I remember when look, there's been plenty of time when I felt very wobbly, like I've always had to build myself up. And I always know when I'm feeling a bit nervous about saying no. For instance, if it's taking me about 20 minutes to write like a 3-line text or even a 1-line thing,
delete.
Trying to find this right way. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. What's going on here? Because it's like there's an anxiety there about something. There's this fear of this sort of tension. But
that self-awareness to be like, I'm finding this really difficult, rather than like, that's because it's not the right thing to do. It's like, why am I? It's like, let's look into it. Let's dig into it.
Yeah, because the big shift around our relationship with no is actually noticing how we are responding when we say yes or no, or even maybe. And when we can have that bit more awareness, we realize, oh, there's some lies I've been telling myself here about what's going on. Because people pleasing is an almost like automatic response, because it's what we're used to doing. We say yes, and then afterwards we go, what the hell have I just turned around and said yes to? And then we're already mentally trying to work out, how am I going to get out of this? You know?
Yeah, I really hope they cancel first.
Yeah, that's a biggie with people pleasers. And then what they do is, you know, they go, are you still on for Friday? And you go, yeah,
I'm like seeing so much of myself in this chat.
Yeah, I'm still on for it. Are you? Oh yeah. You're still on for Friday. Yeah, why are you? Well, and it's like, come out with it. But we build this up, and don't get me wrong, we all have experiences that some are represented accurately, you know, in our folders in our minds, some of them not so accurately, but either way, we're carrying a lot of information around with us about what we associate with saying no. So it is understandable that we experienced some discomfort around it, possibly even feel very, very wobbly around it. And also, we need to become more aware of that and shift the narrative somewhat. Shift, because it's never going to get better if we keep responding the same way, because our body is very clever, but weirdly also very simplistic. So our body kind of goes, well, each time there's a no situation, they keep freaking out. So that must be the right responses I'm sending. So I'll just keep sending the anxiety, and I'll keep sending the guilt. So we have to start noticing these responses that we're having.
Yeah, expecting that kind of ick, that cringe feeling, and then just kind of understanding why it happens, and that we just need to go lean into it and go through it. Would you say, so we talked about the 5 different types of people pleaser, would your advice on how to get over this, or how to manage it, or how to mitigate it, is it the same for all the 5 types?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in the book, I talk about, you know, these 6 steps for breaking the cycle of people pleasing, and all the steps apply to all the styles of people pleasing. Part of the reason why I share these styles is because if you assume that your people pleasing is exactly the same as somebody else's, and you don't really take a closer look at what drives you, then you're never going to break out of this cycle. Like me understanding, I'm very driven by this sense of effort and, you know, following through and being the best and performing, means that now I notice where those things show up in my life. And, you know, I just want to share a little aside here. You know, I was watching Modern Family, I think it was a couple of years ago now, and there was an episode where Alex celebrates her 16th birthday, and she freaks out. She just loses the plot when she's supposed to be blowing out the candles, and it's because she's exhausted and stressed about exams. Then she books herself into therapy the following day as somebody like her, which is a real overachiever. And she then is basically telling the therapist how to do their job, and sort of self-diagnosing while she's in there. In the meantime, her mom is at school and suddenly realizing how enormous her workload is. And so she comes to pick up Alex after school or after her therapy appointment. And she's like, oh my gosh, honey, I can't believe how much work you have to do. And that was what Alex wanted, was this recognition of how much work she had to do. And next thing you know, I break down in tears. And I suddenly realized that I never had that as a child. There was no such thing as limits for me. So it was like, if I said that I was tired or I didn't want to do something, it was, you're not giving it your best. You're not trying hard enough. You're lazy. You're this, you're that. So I'd never had somebody say to me, oh no, that's too much. That's enough. Or that seems like a lot. So it's no wonder that it took being in my 40s along with perimenopause to suddenly go, hold on a flipping second, you have limits and you have this bandwidth that you have to take care of. And so this is about, we've become disassociated from our bodies. We were taught to be disassociated from our bodies, because if you're complying with authorities and everybody says you must obey this person who you think is an authority, and you think it's disobedient to say no, then of course you're not going to trust your feelings and trust your body and what's coming up for you, because you think, oh, this is wrong. And so the first step in it is getting to know your pleaser. So yeah, be aware, oh, I think gooding could be it for me. Like, I really care about being liked at all costs. Or it could be efforting. It's like, I'm all about effort or avoiding or saving or suffering. And then it's like, how is this showing up in my life? Like, what I suggest is spend a week observing how you spend your yes, no's, and maybes. It's an eye-opener. Do it from a non-judgmental perspective, where it's like, just observe your week. How am I spending my yes, no's, and maybes? Who is it that when I see their name come up on my phone, their name pop up in my email, I'm like, oh my God. Who is it that like you're getting like the funny sensation in your stomach, or you're like, when you hear inside your head, like, oh my God, I can't stand this person. Why do they keep out? Notice that chatter, because this is giving you clues to where you could be saying no.
And such a good time of year to do it, don't you think? Because we talked a lot about like reflecting on how do you want to spend your time, money, energy in 2023. So this is such a good exercise to do, because listening to that intuition is telling you a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I say new year, new no. It's not about, you don't need to become a new person. You need to figure out what you need to say no to. How are you going to, you can't say yes to more of the things that you need, desire, and deserve if you're not willing to let go of the things that don't serve you, that don't represent who you are. And we are so busy with our lives that, and often going at such a pace that we don't really have a sense of how we feel, what we like, what's getting on our nerves. And when we actually take a closer look at our week, we'll notice, an example I always give is a lot of us front load our week. So what I mean by this is, even if we do end up working somewhat at the weekends, a lot of us see weekends as, oh, rest time. So we come into Monday and we see that as a start of the week. And a lot of people then, their yeses are very heavy at this point of the week because they're not further along in the weekend. And then they get up on Tuesday or Wednesday, even like, oh my God, how am I going to get through the rest of the week? And it's because we're feeling maybe more energy than we had, say, for instance, on Friday or whenever it was. So suddenly it's like, yes, yes, yes. And then we just pile it all into our calendar, pile it all into our bandwidth, and then go, I don't have all of the energy for this. And so I say to people, start to notice the patterns in how you are going about organizing your life. Like, I am very, I am getting better at it, but I've been terrible for piling too much stuff into my calendar, being unrealistic with my time and my bandwidth. Yeah. And so now I'm like all about margin, like giving way more space than I need instead of expecting me to do so many things. But it's also like, what do you need as a person? Like, are you, the big one, are you skipping wheeze and, lunch breaks and meals and sleep? These are all indicators of where you are not saying no to others, but you keep saying no to yourself about the wrong things, where you're not meeting needs. When I mentioned this on Instagram about how one of my things, I think it was in 2020 or 2021, was no longer holding wheeze, because I saw that as a symbol of like your boundaries around meeting your own needs. I got flooded with a whole lot of messages from people going, oh my God, this
I
is
feel
me.
seen.
Yeah. They were like, I get up from my desk and I'm like, oh my God, am I going to make it to the bathroom?
I used to work for the Mail Online for a few years, and we used to, going for a wee was kind of like was really kind of like in the unwritten contract of things not to do. And I used to, when sometimes when you go to the loo, there'd be post-its on the door on the outside as you came out, because people couldn't wait to ask you a question or to talk to you or to shout at you or something. So even going for a wee was not really an escape. But yeah, but then when you're in it, it just feels normal. And then it's only when you come out and kind of say it out loud and people are like, yeah, that's not normal, you know that, and you can appreciate that. Yeah, that's not the right thing.
It's a symbol of overriding signals from our body. And then what I say is, well, if you're skipping wheeze and skipping lunch and skipping sleep and God knows what else are you skipping about yourself?
Because these are fundamental things that to help us just feel okay and feel normal before then we do all the great stuff.
Super basics. And it's like, and it's being, when you can take a closer look at your life and understand what you need to say yes, no, and maybe to, it is, you get to understand yourself. Like me, I like an early night.
Yeah.
You know, something I talked about recently was about, my book came out and I was in bed fast asleep at 9.
I love when you talked about that. It's so good.
I was like, I am tired. I cannot do all the things. I just need some sleep for a few days just to kind of get myself together. But I've realized I don't want to be out, you know, at all hours. I did all of that. I used to party it up. I don't know how I went out 5, 6, sometimes 7 nights a week. I can barely go out one night. Now, I like it when I go out, but 45-year-old me needs sleep. And I also don't want to work long days, and I also don't want to work long weeks. Doesn't mean I don't want to do anywhere. I just need to honor these parts of myself and build my life around that.
Yeah. Richard's just said I think there's a close link between boundaries and integrity with yourself. So it's honoring what you need, isn't it? So first of all, understanding what that is, and then secondly, having the kind of self-love, self-awareness to honor that. Can you, I'm aware that it's almost 8 o'clock, so I'll need to say goodbye soon. But just before we go, can you share maybe one of the favorite 6 steps for finding the joy and saying no? And then I've just got 2 questions from the chat, if that's okay.
Okay. So I would say make it a desire or say no is one of my, I mean, look, I love all the steps, of course, but the reason why I love that step is because it's a quick way of checking in with yourself about your intentions, because it's your why that makes something people pleasing. And so if your why is about, I can control this thing or avoid this thing, then your why is not an authentic why. It's not an integrity. You know, when you want to do something versus when you feel obliged to do something. And if there's a difference between those 2 things, that is where tension, friction, and resentment reside.
Yeah. So wanting versus.
And if you can't make it a desire, you know, if you feel like it's an obligation and you literally can't bring yourself to actually want to consciously choose to do it, then you need to be honest about that with the other person, or you need to say no. And you know what? A lot of people go, oh no, I can't have that conversation with that person. Then you need to say no.
Yeah. Yeah. And because, like we said earlier, having the conversation is so much better than not, and then living with the ramifications of that. David's asked a question: if you're setting boundaries and being firm in them, but the other people continue to ignore them, what would your advice be there?
So when you're creating new boundaries with people, there are certain people who it's going to take a while before they actually take them seriously, because they're so used to the other version of you that they're like, this isn't real, they're going to change back, right? And you're not. So yes, keep consistently like reflecting those boundaries in how you're showing up, right? So whatever that boundary is, it's not just lip service, it's reflected in how you're showing up, the actions that you're taking around this person and in general in life. And I think that if it becomes clear that this person is always going to be trying to find a way to basically, you know, break your lock, you know, to put the credit card through the door to get through, then, you know, it's at that point where you have to look at, I think I might potentially have to distance myself from this person for a time. It might not be permanently, it could be
Yeah.
temporary, but if you need to, distance yourself from that person so that it is absolutely clear this isn't acceptable for me.
Yeah. And it's not a temporary, it's like you say, it's like because it might suit the other person that you didn't have these boundaries right before. So
yeah, your people pleasing entourage, I call them, like there are certain people who benefit
Yeah.
from you not saying no. So it is understandable that some of them will be resistant when you turn around and go like, yeah, I don't really want to do that stuff anymore.
Yeah, great. Bettina wants to know, final question, what about FOMO? Sometimes I'll say yes to things because of that. How can I manage that?
Oh yeah, look, the whole FOMO thing is again comes back into knowing yourself, because look, you can't do everything, you can't go everywhere, and it's one thing if you have the bandwidth to go and do this stuff and you don't end up beating yourself up, but I think it's digging a bit deeper underneath that FOMO to try to understand where that is coming from and what you're afraid of. Like, is it just simply a case of, oh, I'd love to go to that thing and I hate to miss out on that opportunity to do that? Or is it fear of missing out because you're like, well, people will not think that I'm a fun person.
Yeah.
But if I don't go, what if everybody talks about me and I'm not there? Get to the real reason behind what the FOMO is as well. But also think about those times when you said to yourself, I'm afraid of missing out. Was it worth it?
Yeah.
To go all of those times, but also be choosy. Like, you can't be everywhere and do everything. So some things must surely be more important, have a greater priority than others.
Yeah, absolutely. I do a past year review and I kind of like work out what I've really enjoyed and what I really didn't. And then I try and set my diary for the next year. And that's been so good for then saying no to things. So you kind of, because it's like, I know that I've only got a certain amount of money and I want to go on a trip, like a certain kind of trip, or I want to go on a retreat. So then I'm going to say no to a few kind of random nights out because that I want to spend my money and my time doing that other stuff. But it's like, sometimes we have to know that, don't we, to then be able to say no with conviction.
Yeah, it's being intentional. Like, one of my favorite things to say is like, look, it's not that I don't ever go out during the week, because I do sometimes, but if I know I'm going to go out like during the week, I'm going to kind of give myself a couple of days breather, after that. But if I'm also going to do that when I know I like to be in my bed early with my feet up, then I'm going to be very intentional about that choice.
Yeah.
And make sure that that's actually what I want to
do. I feel like anyone that gets you out on a midweek night date is like very lucky. They're kind of like high up on the list and they'll be like, oh yeah, made it.
Yeah, if you see me out during the week, then you must be real
it's special person.
I'm normally in my bed sort of 9:30.
Well, we appreciate you being here tonight. It's 8 o'clock. I'm going to say goodbye, 8:05. Thank you so much, Nat, for all of your advice tonight. Such a brilliant book. And yeah, just thank you for all the work you do and everything you've already created. I'm really excited to see what happens next for you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful chat. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much, guys. Thanks for getting involved in the questions. I hope you've learned a lot, and I hope you're going to start saying no as of tonight, tomorrow, this week. Stay in touch and keep in touch and let us know. Thanks, Nat. Good night, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Take care.
Bye.